Major General retired David Ivry, the president of Boeing Israel, Fisher Institute Board of Directors, was also the director of the IAI in the past, and various other roles that he played in the past. So I'm just pleased to introduce to you Major General David Ivry, who will be the chairman of this session. Well, finally, I'm allowed to run something here. Distinguished guests, I won't go into the whole list of titles here because we won't have time afterwards for the speeches themselves. So this very impressive conference is commemorating the Columbia crew. We are remembering those dear and wonderful people, also very talented, but obviously we refer mainly to Ilan Ramon, our admirable representative. I saw the Columbia when I visited the United States in 1982 while it was being launched as STS-4. That was the first launch of the Columbia. I was the commander of the IAF at the time, and I was invited by General Gabriel, at the time the commander of the American Air Force, and I was in touch with General Abramson, who was then the head of NASA, and he surprisingly invited me to come to Florida to see the Columbia being launched. At that time, launching a space shuttle was something very unique, very special, and I told him that I was about to leave back to Israel the next day, and that I was under time pressure. So the general got back to me a few hours later and offered to fly Ofra and myself to watch the launch and then fly us back to the airport, to JFK. And that's how it happened. So we got there, and we went up the Titan III, about 25 stories high, where the control room was with all the displays. And when the dawn started rising, I asked where the launching pad, where the launcher was. And they showed me an object some 70 miles away from that tower. I felt disappointed because it seemed too far. And just before sunrise, the countdown started. The engine started, and only several seconds later did I start hearing the thunder and the noises, and the tower started rocking and trembling, and then I realized why we were that far from the launcher itself. But I understood even better the significance of such a superpower as the United States, who could do things such as we were unable to do in Israel. I would have been standing even 100 meters from there, but that couldn't happen there. It's true that the Israeli Air Force can be proud of its achievements during operational activity, but such infrastructure for sending rockets to the moon and to Mars, that's beyond our reach as of yet. Later on, Abramson sent me a picture of our little corner in the Middle East with a little Israeli flag that was flying through space. Then stating that that flag had done 2.5 million miles in space. A similar picture from space with the Israeli flag was given to me by Ilan Ramon when I visited him in Texas in 2001 while I was ambassador to Washington. Ilan Ramon hosted us and showed us the simulators and all the other systems. Ilan was waiting to go to space. There wasn't yet a date for the launch that he would be on. And of course, little did I know at the time that the same Columbia that I saw back in 1982 would end in such a tragedy. Ilan was a man I met when he was a young captain who was on the list of candidates of those who were to go to the US to receive the first F-16s, those F-16s which were ordered by Iran, and because of the revolution there, we were first to get them. At the time, we didn't know that one of those F-16s will be the ones where his beloved son Asaf will find his death. Ilan was one of the eight-member team that went to receive those F-16s. One of the members was not just one of the members of the team that received those F-16s, but also one of the eight-member team who went to attack the Osirak nuclear plant in Iraq. And that begs the question of why is it that the very best are taken first? This question remains open. Now, I need to make a switch to the business at hand, and I will introduce to you now the first speaker on this session. He will talk about the Israeli space program, directions and goals. Brigadier General Amnon Harari, who's the head of the Space Directorate at the Research and Development Directorate in Israel's Ministry of Defense. He served previously as the head of equipment group in the Israeli Air Force, and before that he served in various roles in development and research in the Air Force. After he retired from the military, he served in different capacities in the medical area, industrial area, and others as well. He was the awardee of the Israel Prize in 2008. He's still operationally active, still flies above 1,000 flight hours, and I enjoyed very much working with him in his various capacities. Recently, we served in a certain committee where he contributed greatly, and therefore I was very happy to see him come back to the service of this country as the director of the Space Directorates. Mr. Harari.
Good morning. In my remarks today, I will argue that we, and that means everyone who deals with space, are in a kind of state of stagnation, which is problematic because it is the result of our phenomenal successes in recent years rather than as a result of failure. And at the end of my remarks, I will set the challenge how we can break out of that stagnation. The challenge is directed especially to those bodies that provide budgets. I represent them, and the space industry itself. Investments in space address two levels. There are investments that are to address concrete, clear needs, both civil and security. It is difficult to describe or imagine the world today without the global positioning systems and navigating systems and weather systems, without satellite photographs and all those things that enable us to ensure our security. The second level is that of the technological and scientific push, which is less focused but serves indirectly humanity through the various technological developments in many different areas. Indirectly, the results of the investments also create a sense of power for the countries that are involved in them. They give those countries a status, and the need to create a status is a separate level on its own. So there are three levels to investments in space. And to have presence in space is the ability to develop satellites and launch them. And this has these are enormous investments. This cannot be done without governments. This was true in the past, and I assume that this will be true in the future as well. The market forces would not have built the GPS systems. They would not have built a network of weather satellites that serves everyone. The failed attempt to establish a network of Iridium satellites is an example of the failure of the market forces to replace the governmental with a business approach. Communications satellites are an example that seem to be a good business investment, but could this industry be where it is without all the investments of governments and in the past? Today it appears that perhaps one can do good private business in the area of launching satellites, and there are some civil plants that do that. But it only works when the governments are the main clients of these companies. The space industry is really under the control of governmental budgets. And the advances of humanity in space are really phenomenal. We've managed to domesticate near space, but there are problems. There are projects that have taken much longer than they should have, and I think we are at a crossroads, at a watershed. The governmental budgets are received fairly easily, and all those who have worked only with the government think that it's difficult to get a governmental budget. But when you move over to the civil sector and you try to get a budget through sales, that is when you realize how different it is. And what you get easily does not create an incentive to streamline, to be efficient, to find alternatives, and to save money. And on the technological level, the achievements are outstanding. And when the achievements are outstanding, it's difficult to look for different ways. It's possible to streamline. It's possible to save money. There are many examples of business, commercial entities that have managed to change their organizational culture and found themselves stronger because of constraints that come from the market. But there are just as many industrial bodies and commercial bodies that stopped being cost efficient, and there are very few, if at all, governmental bureaucratic entities that have managed to streamline and be more efficient. If we want the space industry to continue to preserve its status, then it will have to function very, very differently from the way it has until now. In other words, they will have to answer the question how, based on successes, can things be done differently? And that is the subject I would like to talk about. Companies and organizations have a tendency to adopt norms of behavior and functioning that are very difficult to change after they have become fixated. Let me give you some examples. The first example is the two companies, the Israel Aircraft Industries and Elbit El-Up. These two companies became involved in the space industry in the 1990s with no experience. They started from scratch. There was no stagnation there, and their results were outstanding on any scale. The observation satellites that they made are the satellites that have the best performance ratio of any satellites in the world, especially compared to other satellites. The reliability of these satellites is outstanding. The EROS-A satellite, which was launched in 2000, is still functioning, and now we're in 2013. Amos-1, the communication satellite launched in 2006, ended its life in 2012, long after its the last date when it was expected, and that was only because it ran out of fuel. And we can see here an example of the images sent from the IRAS-B, and you can see even better quality images afterwards. This was sent by ImageSat, and it emphasizes the quality of the performance. How did this happen? It was a result of challenging requirements, external constraints, and for example, launching capability, which was limited, and that's why the satellite that they had to develop was a very small one of a very low weight, much lower than that had been accepted until then. There was also a group of very talented engineers, typical Israeli daring, and without the tradition that creates the stagnation. And the performance just kept improving. But 20 years later, when the Israel Research Space Agency came to the same pair of companies, and there's Ultracell, which was previously called LIMSAT, and it was a program for a project, a scientific project, which I think is one of the most fascinating projects for anyone who takes an interest in astrophysics, how the universe was created. And we'll hear a little bit afterwards about that, and also about the aging of the universe. The physicists want to learn about the radiation that comes to Earth from the explosion of supernovas, and especially the wave in short waves, and the composition of the material of which the explosion was made, and to see how these things, and for this to do all this, you need telescopes with a very small aperture, and the ability, and it enables to see these eruptions, and the probability of seeing them is very small, and scientists almost always lose the possibility of seeing the front of the wave, and they lose all the relevant information. So the idea with Ultrasat is to place a satellite in space with a sensor, with a UV sensor that covers a wide angle, about 30 by 30 angles, and this will give greater chances to see the event in real time, and in order to record it soon after it occurs. I think, in my opinion, this is one of the most fascinating projects, and the partners are the Caltech, the Weizmann Institute, NASA. It's in the planning. And of course, the idea is to work with that same pair of companies, BAT and Elbit, in cooperation with the others. But this time, this is not a commercial or security satellite. This is a scientific satellite, and the budgets for science are lower, and the demands are also lower. And when you see, after you have 20 years of experience and developmental practices, the industry only knows how to make one type of project. But if the demand for the scientific satellite is for only for a few years in space, I am convinced that the product that the Israel aircraft industries will produce will be for 15 years. Why? Because they don't know how to do it differently. To have, they don't know how to make a satellite that has a short life. It will be very sophisticated. It will be backed up for almost any type of mishap. And yes, it will also be twice as expensive than the budget that can be provided for a scientific satellite. Because what they produced for 20 years was not only elite products, but also a collection of norms and practices and a culture that are very difficult to change. They'll just say, we've always done it this way in the past, and it worked. And I don't think it's only from the IAI. We can, the IAA, we can see similar things in other countries. If we go to ULA and we ask to develop a launcher that may be less reliable but much cheaper, the answers that we'll get are clear. They will tell us that they produce the most reliable launchers in the world, and they will not agree to do less than that. But if you go to ULA for a more advanced transporter to cheaply put payloads in space, they will explain why it can't be done, and the result will be, for example, if the American government were to pay, say, $230 million for a heavy launch in the future, for publication that I see of the EELV, the Evolved Expandable Large Vehicle, will cost $464 million a launch, which is incredible. It's difficult to see how many of those could be bought. The stagnation that I'm talking about is based and was created by success. It is not typical necessarily of the space industry. I'd like to give you an example from my own personal experience that will illustrate what I'm talking about. For many years, until quite recently, I was in charge of the development of a company called Luminis, which produces medical laser instruments, one of the largest in the world. You can see an example of the devices that it manufactures for all kinds of eye diseases and aesthetics, and also dental devices and so on. Luminis developed and created the most advanced lasers with the best performance and quality, with a wide variety of accessories, adapted for medical needs with the right human interface. The problem was the price and the gross profit, which was relatively low compared to the competitors, significantly lower than the competitors. So when I became the development manager, I set a goal to lower production costs. What didn't we do? We changed people. We brought in consultants. We moved from local production to foreign production. We adapted to demands, and the final result, almost nothing. As if there was an organizational culture that was built into the walls and didn't make it possible to make a change. So the question is, are we indeed fated in the current space industry to remain in stagnation? I say no. I gave an example of ELOC and the space industry earlier, and that is a good example because they can do differently compared to the competition, but it also expresses the fact that when you start from scratch, it's easier to be creative. It's easier to dare to do things in an unconventional manner and create precedents. The second example I'd like to present is that of SpaceX, space exploration. And that is perhaps in comparison to ULA, and I apologize if there are any representatives of ULA here. This company was established from scratch, and in 3 years, with an investment of only $100 million, it developed and built a satellite launcher that can raise a weight of 1,000 kilograms into an LEO orbit. Falcon 1, I don't think there's anyone here who's involved in satellite launches, and there are quite a few of them here, who would not buy performance like that, $100 million in 3 years, or even double if you ask me. Willingly. And it's interesting to analyze the factors that led to this phenomenal success in 3 years. A launcher that can raise a ton into space. So I would like to share what I have learned with you and the factors that made it possible for SpaceX to do what it did. The first one is, of course, knowledge. The company was established and recruited the finest people in the industry in liquid fuels, launchers, and space. and they brought in anyone else they needed to complement that or supplement that knowledge. It's interesting, the people didn't come because they were offered an outstanding salary, but rather they came because of the innovation. It was like a startup. The second factor that I jotted down is the factor of the materials. The whole concept of SpaceX was to use the accepted materials only. In other words, copper and aluminum, nothing exotic, no exotic metals or anything that was not easily available. The third parameter that was the robust standard, and they didn't need to prove with simulations and analyses and all kinds of things. Another thing that I wrote down for myself is it was a one-shot device. It did not use the one shot. There were no pyrotechnics. It used things that could all be tested many times before they were authorized. The next parameter is that the policy of the company when it was established was that everything is done at home without subcontractors, from machining to software and experiments. They didn't have any subcontractors. There were no negotiations. There was no paperwork and lawyers. And the processes in the company and acquisitions were immediate. If you need to buy something, you came to the manager. He without all the heavy bureaucracy that you find in traditional companies. And perhaps to that should be added something no less important, is that all the development was done without a client getting in the way. It was self-development, and the product that was produced is sold on the market. So this is one example that says that it can be done differently. I would also like to take briefly to mention the SSTL as another example of the creative element that built it. And what they did is they shattered the paradigm that you need to use unique components for space, and they used civil components. And so these three examples, the Israel Aircraft Industries at the beginning of its path, and SpaceX and STL, this shows the advantage of starting from scratch. And the question is if that we can take a step up within the existing organizations, especially those that have an outstanding record of success. And I will argue that it can be done. I would like to use the cliche that you have to think out of the box and act accordingly. But there's a problem with this box. The problem is that inside the box, it's so nice and warm, and all the fellows are inside the box too. So if you stay there, nobody's going to complain to you. And to be outside the box is like being in space. It's difficult to get there. It's almost impossible to live there. And it's not certain that you'll be able to get back. So when we say you have to think out of the box, sometimes it's just lip service. So what should we do? First and foremost, I would like to look at the entities that need to demand what they need. You need to get less into the bones of the manufacturers, and you have to know that most products are produced without the intervention of the client. That includes the computers and the iPhones and all that. They are developed by manufacturers, and then the market says what it says. I think we need to adopt different contracting systems that will assure partnership in project irregularities, and we have to demand. You don't need to have a planning to the edge, and in this sense, it's also important that things be done in collaboration so that not everyone has to reinvent the wheel, because that's very expensive. You always have to examine the axioms that everyone has regarding what needs to be done in-house and what can be done outside. And there is an axiom today that you have to do a minimum in-house and outsource the rest. And I think I have a lot of doubt about that axiom. And we need to work on much smaller satellites that cost much less to launch and, of course, cheaper to manufacture. And we have to look for advanced technologies that will make it possible to be more efficient and to use cheaper computers and standardization where it's possible, in software perhaps, and in others. And I would like to conclude by setting this challenge of looking the way to do things differently. First of all, for us, those who order the components, and in the industry and among the users as well. Thank you very much.
I didn't know. Lawyers are the problem in space programs as well. There are a few of them that I would send into space, actually. The next topic is space and national security in Israel. The speaker will be Ofer Doron. Ofer Doron is the director of Mabat Space as of 2011. He served in the Navy, in the Israeli Navy, but still seemed to be a good guy. He was a commander and in charge of weapons for 20 years. He commanded missile ships, including SAR 5, which is our aircraft carrier, and after he retired was the marketing director of Mabat Missiles. Afterwards he was in STSG. And Ofer, even though you're from the Navy, the floor is yours.
Start with the pilot joke, but I'm not sure it's appropriate in this setting. And for those of you with the earphones on, I think you can take them off, and I will do this in English. ולאלה שזה קצת קשה להם, אני מתנצל, יש עוד הזדמנויות בעברית. Space and national security is something that goes hand in hand in Israel. Administrator Bolden showed us before a very clean picture of the Middle East taken from the shuttle, which looked extremely peaceful. I've selected to put some flags on mine that show us that the neighborhood around us is enjoying seasonal changes. Whether they are spring or other seasons remains to be seen. But it is an interesting neighborhood. It is a challenging neighborhood. And space plays a very, very important role in the security of this neighborhood. The space program started out in order to get strategic depth as we were withdrawing from the Sinai Desert as part of the peace accords with Egypt. And ironically enough, 30-something years have passed, and looking into the Sinai Desert with satellites is probably not a bad idea, and it's quite relevant again today. So in this neighborhood, we need a variety of umbrellas for the different types of rain that fall on our head. And we think that space provides a large contribution to our ability to see what's going on far away and to control operations far away from home. And we have... Shalom, Mfaked Chil Avir. I noticed the cameras are turned around a bit. Now, when going into such a difficult undertaking, and Amnon described the beginning from scratch, it's extremely important to focus. And those visionaries that decided to start a space industry from nothing and go straight for the top managed to focus very, very clearly on what the requirements were. And the requirements were to get very high resolution so we could see exactly what was going on. And the requirement was to do it with strategic independence, which meant designing and producing almost everything in-house, and it meant launching in Israel. Now, most of you are staying in the hotel in the south of Tel Aviv. If you look out your window to the left, the sand you see a bit after Jaffa is where we fire our satellites from. There are about 1 million people that live around the launch pad. Nowhere near as far away as David's vibrating tower. And in a small country with a small launcher, with a small launch site, we had to have small satellites, but with big performance. And we think we've done exceedingly well in that. We currently have 4 sub-meter resolution electro-optic satellites in space. I think that makes us number 2 in the world after the United States. They probably have 4,000 or something. But I think the French have got 3, and the others are even further behind. So it's an endeavor that has managed to put very high resolution in large numbers in space with extremely high reliability. We're working on the next generation now. The next generation takes us to even better resolutions. We're talking about half-meter resolutions. And it does that at almost the same weight, at more or less the same costs, so we can fit into more or less the same launcher and more or less the same budget. And those are augmented by the radar satellites because the neighbors know that night is night, so we want to take a look in the night and in the sandstorms and in the clouds and in the fog. And I'll show you some pictures in a moment. We're extremely proud this year to have received a contract from the Italian government to buy one of our new generation of OPSAT 3000 satellites, which is, I think, a tribute both to the very high quality of our satellites and reliability of them, but also a sign of the very good relationships between the countries, and I applaud that. A few pictures of the neighborhood. You ask, why do we need satellites? Everyone says to look what's going on in Iraq, so here's what's going on in Iran, and this is the building process of the nuclear facility in Iraq. No, Iraq is the name of the facility, Iran is the name of the country. Slightly closer to home, Helms, a nice, peaceful town in Syria until lately. Lately, it's become a parking lot for rocket launchers and for all other types of unpleasant vehicles carrying out exceedingly unpleasant activities. When you want to get to distant places in the Middle East to take care of problems that arise, you should have a good look at what's going to be meeting you there. So somewhere in the Middle East, these types of air defense systems are being very closely monitored. I don't want to be fully military here, so not everywhere is as hot as the Middle East. Let's take a bit of a look at an iceberg, a glacier actually, and we can see, I don't know if the picture quality is good enough to see the small ripples in the water as small pieces of ice fall off the glacier. This is way down south in Argentina. So we take a look at cold places sometimes too. We were talking about day and night. So for those of you from the other side of the world, or those who want to go visit there, this is what a radar image would look like from a Texar type satellite or airplane or anything else. And you can notice the very high resolutions there that are achievable with these type of satellites or radars. You can look at the buildings, you can look at the trees. You can't see if the stoplights are red or green, but you can see that they're still there. I mentioned our launch pad. We do things the wrong way in many, many things. The extreme is launching the wrong way around. We launch westward into the Mediterranean. I don't think the neighbors would appreciate it if we launched the other way around. So we do launch to the west on our rather small satellite launcher. Now, if we've talked about small satellites and small satellite launchers, we're going smaller still. And we've started quite a bit of work on nano satellites. We started them out because it was an interesting way of invigorating the discussion on quality, on costs, on the ways of doing business. And we've been going at it for over a year. Initial things were done even before that. And we discovered, at much expense, that buying off-the-shelf pieces and putting them together and hoping for space quality that we've become accustomed to expecting from ourselves, and our customers are accustomed to expecting from us, requires a bit more than that. So we are now designing a nanosatellite bus of our own that will hopefully keep the costs down, but the reliability up where we think we want it, with lifetime measured in years and not in months, and quite a variety of different missions being dreamt about. I'm not sure at all whether this is a big business proposition and whether we're going to get rich out of it. In fact, I seriously doubt we're going to be able to return much of the investment we put into it. But I do think that there are some actual tasks that can be done by them operationally, commercially. I think there are tasks that can be done as part of research programs and as part of test programs. And most important of all is the fantastic discussion it brings out amongst the engineers who are indeed entrenched in what they've been doing for 30 years over how to develop and how to do quality control, and is this a satellite that requires full testing, or is it a box that requires testing like a box? And you should hear the guys going at it. It's a very, very interesting process that we are going through in the development of this, because keeping it with high reliability is not a trivial issue at all. As those satellites are getting smaller, our communication satellites are growing. And we just retired AMOS-1 after 16 years. I think this is an appropriate place to mention that in the week that AMOS-1 was retired, 4 years after its official lifetime, in fact 5 years after, the man behind AMOS-1 and the program manager of AMOS-1, Amitsu Rosenfeld, also passed away. And it's quite a shocking coincidence. So we are moving forward to larger and larger satellites. AMOS-4 has gone up from the AMOS 2-3 satellites of about 1.5 tons. AMOS-4 is a 4.2-ton satellite. You can see the pictures of it here on the screen in various processes of testing and integration. It is fully assembled. It's undergoing its test campaign and will be launched later on this year. It will have 24 transponders and some very advanced capabilities. Based on the same bus is AMOS-4's big brother. There was a large process to bring AMOS-6 to be, and the program got underway earlier on this year. This is a larger satellite. It's 5.5 tons. It has 45 transponders, but is based on the same technologies that we have on AMOS-4, and we are extremely proud to have been selected to design and build the satellite, and we are planning to launch it in 2015. None of this is possible just alone, and I stand here on behalf of the entire Israeli space industry, but also we work extremely closely, hand in hand, with the Ministry of Defense, the IDF, the Space Agency, our customers at ImageSat and AMOS, and the Academy. We work closely with many of the universities. So it's a joint national program that manages to bring, I think, these quite remarkable results to bear. We're hoping to get into space exploration. It's an exciting field, and there are a couple of initiatives underway now. We hope that we will manage, together with NASA and the Israeli Space Agency. I've talked about Ultrasat before, and there is work on trying to get a mission underway to do mapping of Venus based on a radar satellite. So these are two very exciting new propositions. We are working together with the French Space Agency, on Venus, which is a multispectral scientific research satellite, and we have just finalized to go forward towards the launch of Venus in the second half of 2014. So that program is getting under full speed and is vying for attention as one of the 6 satellites that are in integration and design right now. So it's quite a large manifest. And we are working together with the Italian Space Agency on preliminary design of Shalom, which is a hyperspectral commercial satellite. And that study is going along smoothly, and we hope it will mature into a full-scale program between the two countries in the next year or two. And finally, many of our speakers have talked today about education and about kids, and I fully agree that space is way more than just security. It's the drive behind much of it, possibly, but yes, the face of kids and college students and their professors and my mother and everyone else who sees a satellite lights up with excitement. And this can definitely be pulled together to focus education. We think that the decision by the government to put a significant budget in the hands of the Israeli Space Agency will indeed advance the Israeli economy, the level of education, the technology, and I think all of those are just as crucial to Israeli security as building very good satellites for defense purposes. So thank you very much for your attention.
Following offer in English, thank you very much, by the way. He was mentioning that we are launching our satellites the wrong direction, I mean western side. And it reminds me a story about an Australian guy who came to New York. Of course, in Australia they are driving the wrong side of the road, if you know. And he was looking the wrong side, crossing the road, and a cab almost got him. And the driver of the cab understood it's a foreigner, so he asked him, "Did you come here to die?" The immediate answer, "No, I came yesterday." Our next speaker it's a major challenge to introduce the next speaker because we have a CV here for almost a book. And it's not the first time for her to be here with us. Lieutenant General Susan Helms. Lieutenant General Susan Helms is a commander, 14th Air Force Space Command, and Commander Joint Functional Component Command for Space, U.S. Strategic Command, Vandenberg Air Force Base, California. As the U.S. Air Force's operational space component to U.S. STRATCOM, General Helms held more than 20,000 personal responsibilities for providing missile warning, which is one of the most important parts which we have here, cooperation with the United States, space superiority, space situational awareness, satellite operations, space launch and range operations. As a commander of JFCC Space, she directs all assigned and attached U.S. STRATCOM space forces providing failure-responsive local and global space effect in support of national U.S. STRATCOM and combatant commander objectives. And now the question if there is enough time for having some sleep as well. As a flight test engineer, General Helms has flown in 30 types of U.S. and Canadian military fighters. And I just some more highlights and finish with it. Selected by NASA in January 1980, General Helms became an astronaut in July 1991. On January 13, 1993, then an Air Force major and a member of the Space Shuttle Endeavour crew, she became the first United States military woman in space. She flew on STS-54 1993, STS-64 1994, STS-78 1996, STS-101 2000, and served aboard the International Space Station as a member of the Expedition 2 crew 2001. A veteran of 5 space flights, General Helms has logged 211 days in space, including a spacewalk of 8 hours and 56 minutes. It's a long way to walk. This is a real world record. I'll be finished with this one. Susan, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for that kind and long introduction. It often makes me think that I just don't know how to hold a job, because I have had so many amazing yet different opportunities in my career. And speaking of opportunities, I want to take this opportunity to thank the Fisher Institute for Air and Space Strategic Studies for holding this conference in honor of Elon and Ramon. This annual conference, for those of you who have been here year after year, has really grown into something special, a world-class event. And I would really like to thank the organizers from top to bottom for making it the special event it has now become. It always was special, but now it's becoming internationally recognized as a go-to conference, not only to share ideas about where we are in space and in human spaceflight in particular, but also as an educational outreach to an amazing young group of a younger generation for Israel and the rest of the world. I only had the briefest of encounters with Elon during my time at NASA, but I have gotten to know Rona through the contacts of this conference over the last few years, and it was a pleasure, as always, to see her again as well. When Elon was in training at NASA, I was, for the most part, on board the International Space Station for most of the time. Their crew was in training, just starting the training at the beginning of it, about the time that I was on board, looking down at our glorious Earth. And I did, however, even from afar, know of his reputation as an outstanding officer and a fighter pilot. His determination, his good humor, and his spirit of adventure embodied everything that is great about your country and about all spacefaring nations, for that matter. I'm proud to see this conference continue as an ongoing tribute to his legacy, both as a gathering of the brightest minds from the international space community and an opportunity, as I said, for the next generation of explorers to be inspired. It's absolutely an honor to be even a small part of a conference like this. So, as close partners and allies, the United States and Israel share many common interests, including the recognition that the environment of space holds an important place in our way of life. Leveraging the use of space brings incredible and vast advantages. And for those countries with an indigenous launch capability such as Israel, there's the extra advantage of accessing space to support national objectives and foster competition in the global, unique launch industry. So when one thinks of the millennia since the dawn of man, that humans have looked into space and wondered about its secrets, it is amazing how far we have come in such a short period of time. It has only been a little over 50 years, really only the blink of an eye in humankind, since the successful launch of Sputnik 1 by the Soviet Union on the 4th of October in 1957, followed shortly by the launch of Explorer 1 in January of 1958, pretty much about the time I was born, from Cape Canaveral in the United States. Over the following years, both the United States and the Soviet Union would work fast and furious in an attempt to gain a foothold on this new medium of space, both with the placement of satellites and with the deployment of human beings. Soon after, Israel was also making significant strides of its own with the stand-up of the National Committee for Space Research in 1963, eventually becoming, in 1983, what is now the Israel Space Agency. And with the successful delivery of the Afek-1 in 1988, Israel became one of only a handful of nations capable of achieving access to space. Today, we're proud to see Israel stand shoulder to shoulder with the United States and other countries as a strong partner and fellow spacefaring nation committed to the safe and responsible use of space. Although the space age began with the space race for security and prestige between two superpowers, it grew into something that now shapes the way we live our daily lives. Now, more than ever, governments and people all around the globe are able to see clearly, communicate positively, navigate with accuracy, and operate with efficiency thanks to our use of the ultimate high ground. The advantages of the medium of space provides for all mankind. They are far-reaching and essential. Space, of course, has become a physical extension of our global information and communication enterprise. This can certainly be seen in the exponential growth of commercial space assets and the services they provide. And I know you're familiar with the technology and how these assets support everyday utilities like cell phone operations, automated banking machines, the daily weather forecast. Our society has become accustomed to a wide variety of services that have become available because of the advantage that can only be gained by the use of space-based assets. And at this time, more than 50 countries own or have partial ownership in satellites, and citizens of 39 nations have actually flown in space. Of the 190 plus countries around the globe, over 120 now own at least a part of a satellite. And we are now seeing a growing interest in commercial companies to own and maintain private launch capabilities. Markets such as space tourism are now just one example of what private companies can forecast as a way of generating future revenue. These private space companies will continue to gain more and more momentum as the number of launch providers increases and the cost of launching into space, hopefully, decreases. Since that moment, over 50 years ago, when humans on Earth transitioned from just looking at space to accessing space, we've seen an explosive growth in countless technologies, a new kind of global space-based commerce, the fundamental change in how we deal in information, and the recognition of space as an accessible destination for humankind. For humankind beings such as myself, Elon, and hundreds of others, which I predict within the next 50 years will number in the thousands, if not the millions. One of the core motivations of the original space race was to enhance our national security and leverage the ultimate high ground to enhance the protection and defense of nations. This remains an enduring objective. Today, the United States, the mission of space for the purposes of national security is in large part the daily mission that I accomplish every single day in command of our space forces. Strategic Command has been given the mission of leveraging space for the purposes of national security. And the commander of Strategic Command has delegated many of these tasks to the commander of his Joint Functional Component for Space, which is the position in which I currently sit. So therefore, I have the distinct honor of commanding a force of approximately 23,000 men and women from all of the armed services of the United States. And on a daily basis, we maintain a strong and resilient force capable of operating a sophisticated suite of space capabilities in support of military operations around the globe, our national leadership, and our allies and our partners. We are the premier arm of the U.S. government who protects our space systems against real and credible threats. Every day, our military forces depend on space capabilities to effectively and efficiently perform their mission. And every day, the space cadre of the component called JFCC Space performs three key objectives. We sustain and provide space capabilities to the Joint Force and National Leadership. We provide awareness of activities of the space environment and, if required, provide warning on matters related to space activities. And then, in accordance with that assessment and warning, if necessary, we do take actions to protect and defend our space capabilities. A critical foundational element of providing capabilities to the Joint Force is dependable and reliable communications. Through a multitude of communication satellites designed to provide an assured capability at all levels of conflict, space-based communications has drastically altered the precision, speed, and quality of how military forces stay connected in strategic and now in particular tactical operations. Because of the ability to move volumes of knowledge, national and military leaders are now able to make faster and more informed decisions like never before, with the ability to distribute those decisions for immediate effect. There is no doubt that our ability to communicate on a global scale has changed our decision cycle at all levels, and also the way we conduct operations. The use of communication satellites designed specifically for the military, as well as acquiring additional bandwidth from commercial providers, have enabled our military to act with precision and agility as never before, and the provision of military space communications is the mission of the forces of JFCC Space. Every day, countless users in harm's way depend on our provision of bandwidth. We enable those critical services in the context of a constantly changing spectrum environment. Just as the forces enjoy the advantage of precise mobile communications, so too do they enjoy the advantage of precisely knowing their positions at all times, thanks to the automated navigation of the Global Positioning System, or GPS. I've heard that mentioned several times already this morning. I'm proud to say that GPS is a capability that's operated by the United States Air Force. The GPS provides critical space navigation that not only allows us the ability to coordinate movements, but also provides pinpoint accuracy from many of our latest munitions. This 24-satellite constellation provides the world with the ability to perform precision positioning, navigation, and timing. Although it does provide a critical service for our military, the world has obviously integrated the benefits of GPS into a number of areas seen globally in daily living. The timing signal broadcast is used to operate and provide accurate timestamps for automated banking machines and stock transitions wherever they occur. Of course, GPS has forever changed the way we conduct automotive, aviation, and marine navigation. The use of GPS increases the safety and efficiency of travel through air, on land, and sea. And I know there are a number of aviators, obviously, in the room this morning. With GPS on aircraft, we now have new and more efficient air routes, saving time and money in the aviation industry and providing precision effect for military objectives. In summary, this navigation capability, which had beginnings in providing advantage, has become so much more than that, and is a sterling example of a space capability that has gone well beyond the promise imagined by its inventors. Moving to another arena of our mission, our weather satellites, some of which are operated by our Department of Defense. They are also providing data to forces in order to plan for future crisis support, or in some cases, allowing them to take shelter or steer clear of any potential threats, and provide a type of battle space awareness for the conduct of military operations. Recently, these systems, coupled with GPS, played a vital role in relief efforts for global disasters, such as the Japanese tsunami, as well as our domestic response to our own Hurricane Sandy, which battered the eastern seaboard of the United States. Through the use of these systems, search and rescue teams were able to create maps of the disaster areas for rescue and aid operations, as well as conducting damage assessment. Now, moving on, pictures taken from space were an early outcome of the space race. Thanks to our military space cadre, today's space-based industry now provides the modern warfighter with an understanding of battle space like never before. So much so that this capability has now become an essential part of the planning process. We can now see and understand the battle space before ever putting boots on the ground. And this is an application for military, this is an application not just for military and security issues, but also provides, again, support for disaster relief, science, weather modeling, and humanitarian missions as well. This capability and what it brings has forever shaped the way our leaders look at and approach problems. And of course, discussing the ways that space enhances military operations would not be complete without a mention on our timely and accurate missile warning for any potential missile threatening our homeland, the homelands of our friends and allies, and our forces abroad. We utilize a combination of land-based radar and space-based systems to detect and track ballistic threats. We have also strengthened our ability to defend against these attacks by effectively integrating these assets, including the space-based assets, into our missile defense architecture. In an area of global security, the strides we've made in our ability to provide theater space-based missile warning are tremendous. This capability allows a strong level of protection against rogue states that may wish to cause harm. With implementation of new and enhanced space-based missile warning platforms, providing 24-hour coverage for immediate notification, our commitment to the protection of our allies and maintaining peace has never been stronger. And of course, there is our space launch mission. Without a reliable and successful space lift capability, none of what I've just described would even be possible. Future challenges to the space launch community will be in how effective we are in identifying cost-effective ways to bring systems into orbit while at the same time minimizing the creation of debris that is left behind as these spacecraft enter, transit, and exit space. In almost all cases, the launching and terminal operations of satellites result in the creation of debris, which creates an inherent threat to space-based systems, including the International Space Station and any other spacecraft with human beings on board. I would like to take a moment to provide an anecdote of what I mean. While living on the International Space Station in 2001, one day I was looking out the window at our glorious Earth, and floating into the field of view was a large object that to this day I'm not quite sure what it was. It was flat, rectangular, it was black on one side and white on the other, and as I watched it over the period of an hour, it slowly tumbled and began to drift away from the space station. But it looked large, and it looked like something that should cause concern in the event it were to head the other way and hit the space station. And I remember thinking at that time, I wonder who keeps their eye on this problem of stuff that floats around and actually may impose risk to human beings that are living on spacecraft. Now I know. It's the commander of JFCC Space. So after 50 years of space launch activities and the promulgation of space capabilities, space has become somewhat congested. By the way, I now suspect that that piece of debris that I saw out the window was a panel that had come off of the space station that was in effect drifting away. But it doesn't take away from the fact that every single day the forces of JFCC Space do analysis and warning of debris objects, not only for the International Space Station, but also for all active satellites that are currently up in orbit performing missions. Space congestion is a serious problem. We are dominated in our mission by spending time doing this analysis to make sure we understand the threat of two space objects that might pass too close to each other. And indeed, we've upped our game on how much analysis we provide since the collision of the Iridium satellite with a piece of Russian cosmos debris in 2009, generating many more debris objects in space. It is a serious problem that we manage every single day with the forces inside JFCC Space, and along with that comes our management of the problem of spectrum congestion as well. So I would like to talk about our space awareness mission and our ability to provide accurate and actionable information and warning on matters related to the space domain. When I spoke at this conference in 2011, I spoke at length about the importance of our efforts in space situational awareness and conjunction assessment. And since that time, the number of space objects we are tracking has continued to increase, and our ability to track and maintain an accurate catalog has continued to be challenged. Space situational awareness is not a snapshot in time. It requires continual monitoring of the space environment for changes and updates constantly. This type of awareness is critical for decision makers, enabling our ability to predict and, if necessary, provide information to satellite owners and operators that will enable them to take protective measures in the event that they are at risk of getting struck by a piece of space debris. But this type of awareness cannot be accomplished by just one country. In order for actionable awareness and warning to occur, it requires the support and input from every available entity at our disposal. Also, in this era of constrained resources and ever-growing number of space objects, we can only achieve this by working closely with friends and allies who can help us understand the nature of what is happening in the space domain. In the spirit of cooperation, the U.S. government is working to meet that need through the efforts of Strategic Command and JFCC Space. We have created sharing agreements with over 30 satellite owners and operators around the world, and these sharing agreements are crafted to provide services and encourage the sharing of information related to close approach assessments for maneuvers, deorbits, launch, disposal, reentry, and resolution support for anomalies. This is just one way the U.S. government is working hard with the international community to promote a safe and responsible space operating environment. And so our military forces not only provide critical capabilities to forces around the world, but also perform an eternal watch of what is happening in space, ever on the lookout for the threats of congestion in terms of objects and spectrum. And the foundational reliable awareness and warning rests on our ability to track and catalog a growing number of space objects and understand their purposes from the context of national security. To meet this challenge, we are in the process of developing and integrating a major upgrade to the systems we use to perform space situational awareness. Soon we will accomplish a modernization of our network and analysis capabilities, creating a modern support structure capable of supporting processing inputs from not only existing space surveillance architecture, but also expanding to additional sensors that will fit the open architecture we create. Indeed, General Shelton, the commander of Air Force Space Command, who was here last year at this very conference, specifically mentioned this modernization. And I'm here to tell you that the prime beneficiary of this modernization effort will not only be JFCC Space, but all entities who have space objects and are concerned about the congestion problem. Upon completion, we will be able to meld multiple sources of data into an operational view, offering the military cadre who monitor and maintain awareness an interactive program more capable of supporting a timely decision cycle. And not only will they better facilitate solutions for space traffic management, but also have an improved view of space behaviors. And in the interest of national and international security, our military space forces will then ever be better equipped to watch for harmful intent in space and our ability to protect and defend our space capabilities. Today, our space capabilities interconnect the world as never before. The world's continuing to maintain a growth and dependence on what the high ground of space offers, not only for military operations, but for our global way of life in the information age. What has become obvious is irresponsible acts or intentional mischief that creates a sudden and substantial increase in debris will have long-lasting consequences for us all. The United States understands this challenge and is committed to addressing these issues. President Obama has emphasized that in the U.S. national space policy, quote, "It is the shared interest of all nations to act responsibly in space to prevent mishaps, misperceptions, and mistrust. Space operations should be conducted in ways that emphasize openness and transparency to improve public awareness of the activities of government and enable others to share in the benefits provided by the use of space," unquote. In conclusion, I consider myself very fortunate to join Colonel Elon Ramon as one of only a few men and women who have had the opportunity to live and work in space. As an astronaut with over 210 days in space, I revel in the spirit of international cooperation. I'm excited about the possibilities for advancing the use of space and leveraging the amazing technologies that space programs impart on our nation and to the world. And on a personal note, I see the need for the responsible use of space as an urgent call to owners and operators of space capabilities, be they nation states or commercial companies. Only by proactively taking steps to manage the space environment effectively can we hope to preserve its safety and security for every nation, every user, every satellite operator for generations to come. This has been a wonderful conference. I'm sobered by the fact that it has been 10 years since the Columbia accident, but I would tell you that the tragedy still does not detract from the fact that human exploration is worth the effort. I would like to leave you with a quote from the late President John F. Kennedy, who nearly 50 years ago gave the United States the challenge of landing a man on the moon during a speech delivered at Rice University. And he said, quote, "We set sail on this new sea because there is new knowledge to be gained and new rights to be won, and they must be won and used for the progress of all people," unquote. So on behalf of the men and women of JFCC Space, Strategic Command, and the United States, we are proud to do our part to support the human endeavor. Thank you for allowing me to speak today.
Thank you very much.
Susan, according to our tradition, to every NASA administrator or four-star general, we give from a very limited edition of art-made mezuzah that Elon took with him to space. And according to the Jewish tradition, we put the mezuzah on our doorstep and pray that God will bless all who will come in our doors. So for us, you are four-star.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, how do you know, by the way, in space that it is an Israeli satellite which is going on? If it's moving opposite to all the traffic, this is the one, this is the Israeli chutzpah, of course. אני לא צריך להתאמץ יותר מדי להציג את הדובר הבא.
To present the next speaker. Our rabbis have said that a person is never envious of his student, and no one is prouder than me to say that in 1979, when I was commander of the Air Force, I presented him with his wings. And by the way, I had no problems of elevation or altitude in that event. Later he served as a young leader of a squadron under my command in the First Lebanon War, and I think that impacted the outcome of Operation Defensive Shield, Pillar of Defense, and he has had some very outstanding achievements. I am honored to call upon Major General Amir Eshel, IAF Commander, to speak. Good afternoon. It's an honor to be here. And yes, I didn't have a problem of heights. I have a fear of heights. I thank you for the invitation, and I would like to express my appreciation for the Fisher Institute and its people for its work, which I consider very important in the context of aviation and space. I would like to encourage you to continue your work. It makes a very important contribution and a very significant one. And this conference is the 8th Ilan Ramon Space Conference. And when we talk about space, when we're talking about new fronts, in my opinion, Ilan is the ultimate model of excellence, a symbol, a magnet, and I think all the endeavors that are associated with Ilan Ramon, who was a dear friend of mine, are important, and they are also on their own a wave of the future in this area, which will bring in other people that will take it higher. I wondered to myself about what to talk. You know, I have a lot of free time on my hands and a lot of time to think. And I would like to present to you the connection between the security work with an emphasis on the Air Force today and, of course, in the future, and space. And that connection is deep today, and it is going to get ever deeper in the future. And I say that this connection would not have happened if we were not blessed with such excellent people in the security system, in the security industries, who have created over the past 25 years an outstanding made-in-Israel capability. And without that capability today, how could we have carried out what we need to do? We would be doing significantly less in scope, in quality. With the results, we would bring less security to the state of Israel on a significant level. The Air Force is a very important client of space and its products, and I would say something that has some very important significance. We are dependent on the ability to make the most out of space for various needs: intelligence, communications, defense, and I will touch on these things. I'd like to say two things about the region and the challenges that we see, and then the connection to space. So the most recent thing happening here in the area is this so-called spring. There is no spring. It's a season on the regional calendar which doesn't really exist. An Arab Spring is not at all suitable to the reality that is occurring. There are significant and dramatic changes. I don't think I need to elaborate. We're all familiar with it. From the narrow area of governance that goes down, that is going down and decreasing, and is leading to increased terror for various reasons. And these are things that we have experienced. They're not new, but it is intensifying, especially in areas that have not experienced it for many years. And to tectonic processes of the dismantling of countries. We see what's happening in the north, in Syria. That is the most striking example of a state that is in the process of disintegrating, and none of us knows what's going to happen the day after. And to that, add a huge arsenal, some of it state-of-the-art, part of it non-conventional weaponry, and all this is happening. I can't say it's in our backyard, it's right on our border. So we have challenges which are limited and challenges which are very wide-scoped. And what do we see as far as challenges are concerned? And I see this on the military level with an emphasis on what the Air Force sees. We need to contend with the wide range of enemies and rivals, from states to semi-states to organizations to terror organizations and so on. We are contending in the expanse between the sub-conventional to the non-conventional, from the knife to the nuclear. We are dealing with very close ranges to very distant ranges. A scope the expanse of our interest and action has grown exponentially compared to, say, 10, 15, or 20 years ago. We are contending with weaponry of every kind, and we may have to deal with an even broader arsenal with advanced Western munitions, Eastern munitions, local manufacturers, some copy and some invent, anything you can imagine. If in the past we related to the threats and threats on our borders, on our fences, today the situation is completely different. The threats, the direct threats that we are forced to prepare for can come from the front or from in-depth in the territory to the front to deep inside Israeli territory, as deep as it is. It can be cruise missiles, UAVs, we're talking about ground-to-air missiles, surface-to-air missiles, air-to-air missiles, surface-to-surface missiles. And we have to understand that the fences are just the beginning of the expanse that we have to constantly investigate and deal with. And another thing that we have to contend with is the creation of challenges, threats. These threats have an outlet or source. Most of them come from Iran, and they find their way in all various and sundry ways close to our borders. And our need to contend with threats in the making before they come here is increasing. Where are the IDF and the Air Force in the face of all these challenges? We must recognize the fact that we are involved in an ongoing campaign between wars. It's a day-to-day campaign. It requires constant ongoing efforts in intelligence, in attack, offense, and defense. And what characterizes all of them is that they are trying to create these threats under the threshold where a war breaks out. And may break out, but in order to be effective, close, far, subconventional, superconventional, non-conventional, and this expanse when it is under the threshold of war, when it is under the logic of prevention and threats, and this is done with a wide range of weapons, of tools. Some are known, some are not known, and this is done with very unique cooperation between all the branches of the military and the intelligence, and this is not something to be taken for granted, that the Air Force works directly with all the intelligence branches. What is the Air Force doing? The Air Force is a full partner, and in some areas it is the leader. But before I say what is it is operating, I will say that the Air Force, because of the nature of aerial force, the availability, its flexibility, its response capability, its ability to reach long distances, in most cases it is almost the only relevant instrument in this campaign. Because if something comes up, and in a very short time, sometimes, at whatever range, near, mid, or far range, it is possible that it can be, we can find how to address it in various ways, that things take time to build, and it may be relevant, but we may not have that time at our disposal. And so the aerial force has the capability to act almost immediately with almost endless options, almost in any expanse. And it's not that we have solutions for everything and that anything can be done, but there is a capability here that is very different, and that is what makes it relevant in this type of situation. What do we operate? We use aerial manned and unmanned aerial capabilities of many types. We have the unique ground capabilities of the Air Force and the combination between them. We use tools that originally were intended for wars, and this campaign is between the wars, but the capability, the robustness of these tools, their flexibility, their adaptability to the ongoing and changing needs, that is one of the most natural advantages of the aerial platform. And sometimes we have platforms and you don't know, you use them for one thing, they were intended for one thing, and you use them for something that nobody ever dreamed about in different scenarios, different missions, and sometimes with even greater success. The achievements in recent years in the operation of these capabilities are excellent. And because I can't, of course I can't go into details, we're talking about a campaign that is going on 24/7, 365 on different dimensions, and it's not only an aerial campaign, of course. It has intelligence dimensions and political and economic and legal dimensions. Our side, on the aerial side, we are involved in all of it. After having reviewed all these things, and we're all familiar with the reality in which we live, not only the security reality, the economic reality, everything that I've described here, in my opinion, will become even more intensified in the future as far as needs are concerned, and the economic reality will not be especially kind to us in the coming years as a result of global processes. And I say that in the connection between these seemingly two opposite situations, the rising needs and the increasingly limited ability to realize their needs, we need to invest more in space. We must. And I'll explain why. We already need more intelligence over a greater area with more actors, with more components, more. We will need a capability based on communications that comes from space. We'll need to do this all on a greater scale compared to the current situation. We will have to use the space in the world of active defense in order to halt, stop, stem the threats directed to the state of Israel, and we will use that expanse from their point of origin to their strike point in Israel. In every scenario, the Air Force is a major actor, and we will need these requirements more and more. If we move one step up in the world of the Air Force, yes, space is strategic depth, and space clearly expresses the qualitative edge of the state of Israel, which must be maintained in the future. Our capability as a state in the future is a central element in our deterrence, and this capability will enable us to act at any range secretly without infringing on sovereignty and with all the difficulties that we face. The Israeli space industry, I think, is a major economic growth engine. We have to see where the great multipliers will come from. One of them is right here. And what to invest in. And I'm talking about this from our perspective, from the Air Force. First of all, in the independent capability of the State of Israel and the Air Force to launch and to place the satellites that we need in space completely independently. The operation and so on. The next thing, the world of sensors is developing, and the ability to take these sensors and meld them to create one large picture is critical. And we need a wider variety of sensors in space. We need operational flexibility that will lead us to the use of space capabilities on a tactical level, almost on the tactical level, with a coverage that every hour or two there are places where we take a very intimate look at the ability to position measures in space in a short time. This could be critical in order to realize those operational capabilities, certainly at time of war and in between wars too. We need communications capabilities far more significant than now because the scope is growing and it's not on a linear level. The worlds that we are good at as a state are small satellites, and we have to look for the micro and the nano, and this is very closely related to all the issues and capabilities ultimately to produce what is needed in the necessary time in this expanse that is constantly growing. And the next thing, and I say this to us as the Air Force, we need to strengthen the military and civilian cooperation, and this is true within the security system, with the industries, with the research industries, with the academic world. I think this is a very important thing because ultimately, and I say this, we are small, and this connection has a synergic effect which can ultimately create a whole which is much greater than the sum of its parts. And there are relative advantages, and that's no secret. Many entities outside the army and outside the security establishment, and we have to know how to connect better than we are doing it today. And the next thing has already been mentioned, Ofer mentioned, the matter of education. We have to invest down there, and we need to connect down there. And I have to make sure that more and more people touch this world, and anyone who touches it is captivated by it. One of the branches, I don't know if you know, 25% of the technological education in Israel is in the Air Force, together with the networks, the school networks, Ort, Amal, and so on. One of the most moving experiences I had in recent months was in a classroom somewhere near Haifa, in Osfia, in a Druze town, in a class named for Ilan Ramon, and they're studying space. And to see the excitement of these young students, I think that you just have to ignite that spark. And it will continue to burn after that and keep the flames at the right level. To sum up, the challenges are complex and changing. Well, let's put it this way. The Middle East has looked the same for the past 5,000 years. The enemies keep changing and the configurations keep changing. It doesn't get easier. The conventional threats, to a large extent, have decreased. I don't think that we can expect an invasion of foreign divisions into the land of Israel, but there are different capabilities that have developed in the understanding of their effectiveness. And this represents a serious challenge, and that challenge, as I said, is now spread out over far greater distances than we had to contend with in the past. We cannot wake up only when the fighting breaks out, because then we won't be prepared and our achievements will be less. We act daily so that to decrease the immediate threats, to create better conditions in which we can win in wars when they happen. And this is a constant struggle. And in this struggle, the Air Force is a major player here and thousands of kilometers away from here. The space capabilities are critical for the ability to carry out the missions and to do so successfully. And at this opportunity, I would like to express my appreciation to all those who are involved in this field. We base ourselves on these achievements and the capabilities that have been developed over the years here. We are picking these fruit almost on a daily basis, and I call upon you to continue even more intensively in this direction and at this intensity, because the requirements are only growing. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Amir Eshel, to Major General Amir Eshel. We, of course, all wish him great success. His success is our success. And I'd like to invite you all to lunch. Thank you very much.